A question that I wonder when I read your book and I've seen some of your interviews is how do you think about the relationship between your work and your writing and your perspective and the question of patriarchy, which is a
Yeah.
word which is thrown around a lot in our modern world. What does that word mean to you, and how do you think about that?
I've been thinking about this a lot. Excuse me. Sorry.
Sure,
I've
yeah,
been
take
thinking
your
about
time.
this quite a bit. And I've been thinking about it since about 2019 when the American Psychological Association came out with some guidelines for clinicians who are working with boys and men. And this was a document that had some, yeah, it was a mixed bag. It had some good points, but for the most part, it was more harm than good because it really damaged the trust that men have in psychologists. But maybe that's a separate piece of the discussion. But a foundational piece of that document was patriarchy. They didn't use the word over and over. They only used it a few times, but it was a foundational concept that we live in a patriarchal society that men benefit from and women suffer under. So use this word patriarchy in these guidelines, but they never defined it. And I started to notice at that point that, yeah, I've been hearing this word for a long time, but I've never heard a definition of what patriarchy is. I mean, I've heard definitions, but they're not specific. So I'll give you an example because I knew this question would come up when we talked today. So I started looking around on the web for a definition of what is patriarchy? What is this thing that we keep talking about? And so here's a sample of what I found that's very representative from a website called Simply Psychology. And they have an article on there about what is patriarchy. And it's filled with a lot of really vague language. So I'll give you an example. At one point, they say patriarchal relations structure both the private and public spheres, with men dominating in public life and in their home. And they quote a paper that I'll refer to in a minute by Nash 2009. So we got this sentence here with a lot of terms that aren't defined. So patriarchal relations, what is that? What is a patriarchal relations? No one in the article does it say. An entire article filled with this kind of language, no definition of what a patriarchal relation is. It structures the private and public spheres. What does that mean? How exactly does this thing structure private and public spheres? It doesn't say. With men dominating in the public and private home, public life, and in their home, dominating. What does that mean? It doesn't say. Nowhere is any of this defined. So we've got this whole article with this very vague, emotionally laden language, no definition. Again, we have these really vague assertions. So I'm looking at this word patriarchy. Sorry, I'm getting long winded here because I want to get to your question. What is patriarchy? And I think, well, patriarchy is obviously not something that anyone is really willing to define, even in the Barbie movie. Did you see the Barbie
Sure,
movie?
yeah, saw the bar movie,
Yeah,
yeah.
I liked the movie.
I
That's
liked
a
it
great,
too.
yeah, it was fun. But they use this word patriarchy all the way throughout the movie. Nowhere do they define it. Nowhere, not a single time do they say, okay, this is what patriarchy actually is. We're just supposed to accept that it's something that hurts that men do to women. Sort of like the APA guidelines. The APA guidelines and the Barbie movie were identical in that regard, in that they both rely on this concept that neither one of them defines. But at least the movie was entertaining. So
Hmm.
I'll give it that. So do you think that that's is that a that was very long-winded, but is that a fair definition of patriarchy?
Maybe I've heard you, and maybe not you. You could say if this is not you and I'm misrepresenting, but I think certainly other people, people you've spoken to, talk about a woman entering a man's frame in a relationship, or a man, or maybe the opposite. Would that be like a mutual, relationship where there's a symmetry, like an asymmetry in a relationship versus a symmetry? Do you think this idea of like a woman should enter a man's frame, would that be an example of a patriarchal assumption, or is
That's
that
a
or is
that's
that
a
not irrelevant, or is that like a different thing
No,
altogether?
that's completely, I think that's completely irrelevant. Let me think about that for a second. That the way frame is used in that regard, that comes out of the red pill
Hmm.
community. They didn't invent the frame. They didn't invent the concept of frame. And frame would be, let's see if we can define it here. Frame would be somebody when two people come together that one of them is going to enter and agree to the rules and the structure that of the other person's existence. When the red pill guys talk about frame, they're talking about sort of a similar way of viewing the term, where when two people come together, man and a woman, could be two guys, not to box people in, two women, but when two people come together in a romantic relationship, one of them more than the other is going to enter the frame of the other person. So one of them is going to enter the world of that person and the relationship is going to define more by that person, the person establishing the frame, more by that person's their schedule, their way of doing things. One of them's going to wear the pants, so to speak. Whether it should be the man or the woman, I don't know. It's not for me to say. It seems to me that it's not for me to say what two people should do, but I can say that it seems to, I have noticed that relationships between men and women seem to go a little smoother when men assert themselves in relationships and when men ask for what they want. And when men, not that men need to rule over the woman, but women tend not to be very happy with men who are sort of spineless piles of jello.
Mhm. I think that there's a tendency in boys to police manliness,
Yeah.
you know? And when I think about patriarchy, I think about that more than anything else. I think it's about boys telling other boys what it means to be a man, you know? And to me, I wonder if those definitions tend to be very rigid. And now I'm very masculine. I check all the boxes, I'm an athlete or whatever. Or I'm not so much now, but I was in college, let's say. Um, but but my friends didn't have to be. And to me, their man card wasn't in question. And so I've worked good jobs where I made good money. And now I don't make such good money. And my wife makes more money than me. And I have friends who don't make money, and to me, their man card isn't in question, but for some people it is, and I think that's an interesting distinction.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd not thought about patriarchy being men policing each other. I think there's probably something to that.
Yeah,
But so anyway, you can set that aside. I'm curious what your definition of patriarchy is.
I think it's policing gender roles. I think it's the idea
Okay.
that men have a certain role, which is to, be out in the world and be a provider, and a woman have a certain role, which is to take care of the home, for example. And that's a big piece of it. And the idea that man should be masculine and manly, and that a woman should be like your soft pillow when you come home from the busy workday of the world is all hard and whatever. And the woman is your comfort blanket, and she makes you feel better, and she gives you a bowl of soup and gives you a hug and says, "I'm so happy to see you." It's this policing, and it's men should be tough and stoic, and women should be emotionally comforting to men. That's sort
Okay.
of I see, a policing of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Woman, there's also
Yeah.
the asymmetry and sexual double standards. So like, a man is entitled and is okay to sleep with a lot of women, but a woman who sleeps around is a slut, you know? And there's, slut shaming, this policing that men, only women who are pretty are valued as women. And anyone who's like unpretty, if you put a overweight woman on a magazine cover, that's tyranny or something. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting definition of patriarchy. I have to think about that because it's not, it's connected to this idea that men are oppressing women, but it's not dependent on that idea necessarily. You're talking about enforcing
Right.
gender roles.
I
Some of
think
that
I
comes
think
from,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry. You go first.
no, I'll hold my thought. What were you going to say?
So I was just gonna say I think men suffer under patriarchy. That's my belief. My belief is that the bullying, Elliot Rodgers was bullied by men. Men, he writes in his biography, his autobiography, a men like put his head in a toilet or smash his head into a desk. Like he was bullied by men.
Mhm.
He's a victim of patriarchy in my experience. Men being mean to him because he wasn't masculine enough. He didn't look like a real man. That's
Okay.
how I see it.
So then I would argue, I'm gonna be devil's advocate here.
Mhm.
Actually, no, I'm kind of disagreeing or kind of agreeing with you that if patriarchy is the enforcement of gender roles, then women would be just as guilty of it as men because, for example, slut shaming, I'm not going to be able to back this up with any studies or
Yeah,
data,
women do
but
it, of
that
course.
comes more from
Absolutely.
women than it. Would you say there any value in enforcing gender roles?
Yeah, I think there's a cost. I would say there's a cost to feminism. I understand feminism as the rejection of gender roles, and of course there's a cost. And
That's interesting. Hang on, I gotta write that down. Go
okay,
ahead. I'm just making notes for
yeah,
myself.